I want to talk about something today that has been quietly building for weeks now, and the mainstream media has almost entirely refused to cover it. And honestly, the fact that they're ignoring it makes it even more alarming to me, because what we're talking about here is not some fringe story. This is not something that was dug up on a random corner of the internet. This is being confirmed by active military commanders, on camera, on the record. And yet, most people have no idea this is even happening. So let me walk you through exactly what's going on. American military bases, on U.S. soil, not overseas, not in some foreign country, right here inside the United States of America, are experiencing power outages, water shutoffs and natural gas cutoffs, and not just once, not just twice. This is happening repeatedly at multiple locations, and the frequency is increasing. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, okay, this sounds like a conspiracy theory. Bases losing power? Come on. But here's the thing. I'm not the one making this claim. Admiral Kevin Lundy went on CBS News and described exactly what has been happening. On the record. In his own words, this is a sitting military commander telling the American public that his stations are losing power and losing essential services, while his crews are on standby to respond to emergencies. Let me give you the specific locations, because I think it's important to be precise here. Coast Guard Station Channel Islands in California, power cut off. Coast Guard Station Port Huron in Michigan, services cut off. Coast Guard Air Station Barbers Point in Hawaii, natural gas service cut off. 3 separate locations, 3 separate states, all experiencing the same kind of disruptions. And Admiral Lundy made it very clear. They were able to restore services each time, but the number of incidents is growing, and he expects it to keep growing. Now stop and think about what that actually means in practice. These are not office buildings. These are not government administrative facilities where people sit at desks and fill out paperwork. These are active Coast Guard stations. These are the facilities where crews are on standby around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, ready to launch at a moment's notice the second someone is in danger out on the water. Someone's boat capsizes at 2 in the morning. Someone's been floating on a life raft for 3 days in freezing water. A cargo ship sends out a distress signal in the middle of a storm. These are the people who respond to that. And the lights are going out at their stations. The Admiral himself said it best. He said these crews stand by to respond at a moment's notice to any mariner in distress or any threat to the nation. And suddenly the lights go out. Suddenly they don't have water. He said the American public should be furious. And honestly, he's right. Because this isn't a bureaucratic inconvenience. This is a direct threat to the operational readiness of a military branch that exists specifically to protect American lives. And then, as if that wasn't already alarming enough, we got news mid-broadcast that the USS Higgins, a Navy destroyer operating in the Indo-Pacific region, had completely lost power after a major fire on board. Right there, in real time, while this conversation was happening. So we're not just talking about bases going dark on U.S. soil anymore. We're now talking about a warship losing power in one of the most geopolitically sensitive regions on the entire planet. The Indo-Pacific, the exact region where our strategic competition with China is playing out right now. So let's talk about that, because I think it's a piece of this story that's being completely overlooked. Colonel Rob Maness joined the conversation to help break all of this down. 32 years of combat experience. Former United States Air Force. Recognized expert on energy infrastructure and national security. And the first thing he did was point out something that I think most Americans genuinely don't know. The Coast Guard is not part of the Department of Defense. Most people assume it is. It sounds military. It operates like a military branch. Its personnel are uniformed service members. But after 9/11, when the Department of Homeland Security was created, the Coast Guard was moved out of the Department of Transportation and placed under DHS, not the Pentagon. Not the Department of Defense. The Department of Homeland Security. And why does that matter? Because it means the Coast Guard doesn't have the same political infrastructure, the same budget muscle, the same contingency planning resources that the other branches of the military have. When the Army or the Navy or the Air Force faces a budget crisis, they have an entire department apparatus built around fighting for their funding and protecting their operations. The Coast Guard is sitting inside this massive, sprawling bureaucracy called DHS, competing for attention and resources against border security, FEMA, the Secret Service, TSA, and a dozen other agencies. It's not a level playing field. Colonel Maness actually shared a personal experience that I found really striking. Back in the winter of 2011, he was the commander of Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, the sixth largest Air Force base in the entire country, home to the largest nuclear mission in the United States. And in the middle of the night, without any warning, without anyone telling the base commander, the natural gas supply was cut off. Why? Because Texas was struggling to maintain gas pressure to New Mexico due to cold temperatures. And just like that, one of the most critical military installations in the country went without natural gas in the dead of winter. His point was that these kinds of infrastructure failures can and do happen. But, and this is the critical part, what we're seeing with the Coast Guard right now goes beyond simple infrastructure failure. Because when you look at where these incidents are concentrated, you start to see something that is very difficult to explain away as coincidence. Michigan, California, Hawaii. 3 states. And what do they have in common? They are all states that are politically controlled by the opposition party to the current administration. Now, Colonel Maness was careful about how he framed this. He didn't make a definitive accusation, but he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that seeing all of these installations experiencing disruptions in states with a particular partisan lean, at what appear to be critical operational moments, is, in his words, very, very weird. And coming from someone with 32 years of military experience, that's not a throwaway comment. That's a serious observation, and here's where it gets even more concerning from a strategic standpoint. California and Hawaii. Think about where those states are on a map. They are your Pacific Gateway. They are your forward operating presence in the most strategically important ocean on the planet right now. Because if you've been paying attention to what's happening geopolitically, you know that the Indo-Pacific is where the real long-term competition is playing out. China is building out its naval capabilities at an extraordinary pace. Taiwan is a flashpoint that could ignite at any moment. The South China Sea is contested waters, and your Coast Guard installations in California, and Hawaii, the installations, that are supposed to be part of your Pacific security, architecture, are having their power and gas cut off. Colonel Maness put it very directly. He said weakening Coast Guard presence in the Pacific at this particular moment, when assets are being repositioned, when tensions are elevated, could be very, very dangerous. And I think that deserves to sit with you for a moment, because we're not talking about an inconvenience. We're talking about degraded operational readiness in a strategically critical region at a strategically critical time. Now let's zoom out even further, because there's a bigger picture here that I think explains a lot of why this situation exists in the first place. Congress has still not passed a proper budget. These Coast Guard men and women, the same people who are doing search and rescue missions in the middle of the night, the same people whose stations are going dark, could go without a paycheck by mid-April if Congress doesn't act. Mid-April. We are talking about active military personnel potentially not getting paid. And where is the urgency? Where is the outrage? Because here's the contrast that Colonel Maness drew, and I think it's damning. While Coast Guard stations can't keep the lights on, while their crews are potentially facing missed paychecks, we are sending continuous flights of weapons and military equipment overseas, non-stop. Billions of dollars flowing out of this country to fund foreign operations. Members of Congress themselves have admitted that we are running low on our own munitions stockpiles because of how much we've been sending abroad. We are depleting our own military readiness to fund operations overseas, while the people who are supposed to be protecting American waters and American lives can't pay their utility bills. And then there's the Department of Homeland Security problem. Colonel Maness was actually one of the rare voices back after 9/11 who publicly opposed the creation of DHS. At the time, that was a very unpopular position to take. The entire political establishment, neoconservatives, the new administration, Figures like Tom Ridge, who became the first DHS secretary, were all pushing for this massive new department as the answer to the security failures that led to 9/11. The TSA, the reorganization, the consolidation, it all felt like decisive action at the time. But Maness saw it differently. He argued that all you were doing was creating another enormous bureaucracy, another layer of administrative complexity, another set of institutional turf battles, and that it would ultimately get in the way of actually accomplishing the mission. And looking at where we are now, it's very hard to argue he was wrong. DHS has become exactly what he predicted, an overly complex, overly bureaucratic organization that struggles to stay focused on its core mission, which is supposed to be protecting the American homeland from terrorism, drug trafficking, and organized criminal threats. His solution is straightforward. Move the Coast Guard out of DHS and put it under the Department of Defense as its own branch with its own secretary. Give it the political infrastructure it needs to fight for its budget. Give it the institutional weight to protect its operations. Give it access to the Defense Department's resources and contingency planning capabilities. Because right now the Coast Guard is getting lost inside a bureaucratic maze while its stations go dark, and its crews wait to find out if they're going to get paid, and while we're talking about things that should make every American angry, let's talk about Chinese land purchases near military installations, because that story has been quietly developing alongside this one, and the two are not unrelated. There have been documented cases of Chinese-linked entities purchasing farmland and real estate in close proximity to American military bases. The strategic implications of that are obvious, and Congress, to their credit, has apparently finally started moving on legislation to address it. But the fact that it took this long, the fact that it was allowed to happen at all, tells you something about how seriously we've been taking threats to our own homeland security. So let me bring it all together, because I want to make sure I'm being clear about what I think is actually happening here and what the stakes are. You have a military branch, the Coast Guard, that is structurally disadvantaged when it comes to budget fights and political advocacy. You have that branch sitting inside a dysfunctional bureaucracy that has never fully lived up to its mission. You have Congress failing to pass a budget, leaving those service members facing potential missed paychecks. You have critical installations in Pacific-facing states losing power, and essential services at a moment of elevated strategic tension with China. You have a Navy destroyer losing power in the Indo-Pacific. And you have a pattern, Michigan, California, Hawaii, that, when you look at it geopolitically and politically, raises serious questions about whether this is all just a series of unfortunate administrative failures, or whether something more deliberate is going on. I'm not here to tell you definitively what the answer is. I'm not going to sit here and say I know for a fact that someone is intentionally targeting these installations. But I will tell you this. The facts, as they stand, do not add up to a comfortable explanation. The pattern is too consistent. The timing is too specific. The locations are too strategically significant. And the silence from most of the media is too loud. Colonel Maness said it himself. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is looking at the facts and asking the questions that the facts demand. And the question they demand right now is this. Who benefits from American military installations going dark at this moment, in these locations? That's the question I want you to sit with. Because the answer to that question matters, not just for the Coast Guard, not just for the men and women who serve in it, but for every single one of us.